Well, welcome back to Conversations at the Leaky Cauldron, episode 27, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, chapters 31 to Epilogue. And back with me are my esteemed colleagues for this final part one of two, just like the movies, Miss Sarah Miller and Mr. Wesley Schantz. Welcome back, you two.
Hey, good to be back. How's it going?
It's going great.
Yeah, good. Long time no chat.
Long time no chat. Plenty of time though to get revved up and ready for this. I found myself just from the pathetic element, sometime in tears during the course of these final chapters, and that's altogether a pretty incredible feat. Just because the conditions under which I was often listening to this beautiful book were while I was in an hour-long commute, 30 minutes of which were, bumper to bumper traffic. And so getting a tear out of me at that time that has nothing to do with rage is, I think, quite some feat. Also tearing me from the stupor of bumper to bumper traffic as well. But on the more serious note, I thought what I'd let the listeners know is that what we talked about beforehand is that we might hit some of the broader, more global questions about what fantasy literature is doing exactly, maybe within a social context and even maybe within a psychological or more broadly literary context in our next episode. But in this episode, I thought I could throw out some ideas. We can just dismiss them if we want, but maybe one of them will light a good flame and will lead us down an interesting passage. And so without further ado, I just wanted to mention, so Harry dead naming Voldemort and refusing to play his game, I thought was very interesting. Not calling him Dark Lord, not even calling him Voldemort, calling him Tom Riddle. And I wanted to see what y'all thought about that and the power of words and how that might have connected back to spells or just what's happening with literature in general. The end of the story literally involving the killing of a snake, the final Horcrux Nagini, as well as a snake-like being Voldemort, and possibly even the evil inside of Harry, which could be represented mythologically as a snake, and how that is, and how Voldemort is even more snake-like. He's described as a snake, but he also sheds his skin, and also people for that matter. How that's also a Christian idea, with the idea of St. Patrick beating off the snakes, from the British Isles, Revelation ending with a giant dragon, which is a snake, seemingly the super form of the snake in the Garden of Eden from the Old Testament. And in Dante's Purgatorio, at the bottom of Purgatorio is a snake, and at the top is a giant dragon. And that's also more broadly mythological. You can find this sort of imagery in Greek. In Greek stories, the apples of the Hesperides are guarded by a dragon, and Geryon is a dragon. He's one of the creatures that must be destroyed by Heracles during his 12 labors. Also, this is a broadly fairy tale motif. I was wondering if y'all wanted to talk about that at all. Also, the Christian sacrifice of the son by the father and freely being chosen by the son. This one's for you, Wes. Neville's part is the unchosen one, and what that even means. The strange magic of Harry's death. I didn't understand this, and the heaven scene with Dumbledore, who now proves that he is a role manifesting directly in Harry's mind. I was wondering about that. What is Dumbledore doing? What is his status there? Is this a spirit thing? Is this a mental thing? He does make an interesting comment about the mind there and things being in the mind being real, very Kantian. I didn't understand how the Elder Wand got to Harry's dominance. I sort of understood, but I wasn't sure whether I missed something. Also just because in the news recently, Harry Potter books got banned at a Catholic elementary school, I believe it was in Tennessee, and one of our friends was an alumnus from there. In what way is Harry Potter anti-Christian in a non-evangelical way? And then also Snape's special memories. What were his true feelings for Harry? Did he think Dumbledore's plan to sacrifice him was cruel? Did he actually care for Harry? Problem with the death of Fred instead of Ron. I definitely want to mention that at some point. You've helped me hype that up, Wes. Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to stick with my argument against that. Yeah, I think that was a mistake. And I want to understand the resurrection stone a little bit better with y'all. So hopefully I'm done talking for the rest of the time. Sorry for that long list, y'all. I just want to put a major feast on the table.
Gosh, well, where should we start, Sarah? What do you think?
I mean, I would add in a couple pieces before we pick where to start. Just and I think a lot of things overlapped, but things that we can talk about, things that we notice. I'm super interested in why Harry saves Draco Malfoy multiple times, or saves that family, and saving Draco at first in the Room of Requirement, and then telling his mother that he's still alive, and basically being saved as a consequence. And then another thing that I'm really interested in is right in the battle sequence, there's a moment when like all of these women are fighting, and the moment when like Molly Weasley steps in and starts fighting Bellatrix is a level of like powerful language used to describe the art of like magical battle that I had never heard before. She made the earth like warm, and I thought it was really cool. I mean, I think it's easy to forget like the role especially in a battle sequence, the role that women play, and she seems to kind of complicate those stereotypes. So I don't know where to start, but those were two other things in addition to what you said. I'm sort of interested in a lot of what you said, Alex, why Neville is able to kill the snake, and why Voldemort's final set of spells don't seem to work on anybody. I think that's really an important piece to investigate. So, what do you think, Wes?
Yeah, well, so the final battle has many parts to it, and it kind of has these crests and these valleys to it. There's the chapter that's called the Battle of Hogwarts, but that's really just like round one, right? And then it does wind up. Actually, the final duel takes place in the hall, but there's that part in the woods between the two, and all of the stuff that takes place in Harry's mind that we mentioned a little bit about, and in Snape's mind too, for that matter, right? The pensieve pops back in here, and off stage, yeah, other characters are doing important stuff too. You got Ron and Hermione descending to the Chamber of Secrets. This is one of the strangest things to me reading it this time, was that Ron can speak Parseltongue well enough to open the Chamber of Secrets.
Right.
That was awesome. Good for him. So, yeah, bringing back some basilisk fangs, which can apparently destroy Horcruxes. Another thing that can destroy them, fiend fire. This like incredibly powerful magic that we have never heard of before, but makes its appearance here, and is crucial because it destroys one of the Horcruxes also. So there's just a lot going on here, and I guess to start with the Hallows versus Horcruxes theme really comes out in a powerful way. That Dumbledore that's in his mind sort of confesses that he was led astray by the Hallows, right, by his own good intentions. That one Hallow, which is both a Hallow and a Horcrux, right, the Resurrection Stone, he was tempted by it, and in his eagerness, he put it on, and that was sort of the first sign of his decline, right? But we learn that Harry is also kind of a Hallow and a Horcrux, right? Because he's descended from the line of the brother that got the cloak, but he's also, actually an accidental Horcrux created by Voldemort, and that's how I understand that to be how he, dies and is resurrected there, right? Because the part of him that dies is the Voldemort part in him, and so we get this image once again of Voldemort being his own undoing, the thing that he considered the most powerful, right? The Elder Wand. The way that I understood that was that because Draco had disarmed Dumbledore, Draco was the rightful possessor of it,
Okay.
not Snape. That's the key little detail there, I think. And Harry, of course, had defeated Draco.
One question though: when
Yeah.
he defeated Draco, Draco was not in the possession of the Elder Wand, even if he was the master of the Elder Wand. Is that the case? Because
Yeah, as far as I can trace
okay,
whose wand is which.
so even if you beat the person with the Elder Wand when they're not using the Elder Wand, it will change allegiance.
I think that, first of all, I think that has to be the case in order for it to make any sense.
Right.
But right. Otherwise, it's like what? But it's like a Reddit plot hole. But like, I think it points out that to be master of something doesn't mean you use it, right? Like mastery isn't pure utility, I guess, and
it can be restrained.
Right. It seems as though that's the lesson that Grindelwald did not accept, and that Dumbledore only accepted. The idea that there is power in having something and not using it, or in restraint. I'm not gonna. I guess I think that seems to be the lesson of the Elder Wand, right? And that's like the fact that Voldemort isn't interested in the other two, and neither was Grindelwald. Not like that to see dominance or power or strength as measured only by the degree to which you subjugate others. I think that's the lesson of one of the lessons of the entire series is that actually isn't power, and it's intimidation, and it maybe allows you to accumulate temporary position, but it's ultimately an enervating choice, and like self-defeating, and that Harry must have been the master of the Hallows even if he didn't possess the Elder Wand, because it was about like a disposition. Like he didn't even, I don't know if that makes any sense. And I think the idea is that the Harry part of himself doesn't die because the Elder Wand won't kill its owner. It will kill what is inside its owner, right? And so Voldemort eliminates his own Horcrux, I guess.
Well, that's perfect, because then
that's how I understood it.
Yeah, I have a lot to say in response to that, in agreement. Then it's almost like that's Dante's point about the power of the Logos, that it illuminates the darkness within, and that the ultimate use isn't to find the splinter in the eye of your neighbor, but the mote within. It's as if the Elder Wand, the best use is to destroy the darkness within yourself. That's what's evil within yourself, that which Harry has been struggling against this entire series, and especially the last couple books. And so the Elder Wand's true power, and this is almost something that Obi-Wan Kenobi tries to say in Star Wars, but these motifs overlap, is to use the power of the Elder Wand to destroy anything, to destroy what's evil within yourself, is the only way you can destroy Lord Voldemort, insofar as he is the proximate representation of the archetype of evil in this world. And that, again, Harry embodies the father as the son of Dumbledore, and that he becomes, you just alerted me to this, the master of the Hallows, without seeking to become master of the Hallows. And for totally unselfish reasons. The very same reason that he first received the Resurrection Stone or the Philosopher's Stone. I think those are the same thing. Are they not? A question I have for you two. But just as having a broad response to what the connection between the Horcruxes or the Horcruxes and the Hallows is that they all seem to, as magics, separate the owner from others. whether it be giving them some privilege they shouldn't have, like being able to resurrect the dead and being separate from others, or making you so powerful that you relate to others in a unique way, like a tyrant, or that you can just totally be away from others in an invisible way. And Horcruxes, of course, separate you off too. I wonder to what extent part of the message of these ultimate pieces of magic is that they're no magic at all. Insofar as magic separates you from people, and insofar as the ultimate evil magic actually separates you from your own soul, or separates the integrity of your soul, and also separates people's bodies from their soul, Avada Kedavra, it's not magic. It's something else. You've missed the true magic. And I'd like to touch on true magic and the role I think Molly Weasley embodies against the role Bellatrix embodies a little bit later. I would like to say that she represents mother and sort of an ultimate feminine and just human motivation, whereas Bellatrix represents the poverty of nihilism and not standing for anything in that moment. So that's what I had to say just immediately in response to what you had said, Sarah.
Yeah, no. I like that idea that the things that separate what ought to be unified seem to be things that are worth, at best, keeping at arm's length, right? And at worst, destroying, right? Maybe there's something to the fact then that Harry provides other people opportunities, wittingly or no, to eliminate those Horcruxes, right? Like with the locket, Ron is the one to destroy the piece of the soul inside. Hermione destroys the cup. It's almost as though like like nature in some way destroys the diadem, some like messed up version of fire. Neville destroys the snake. It's like he's providing, maybe unintentionally, he's like working as a part of a team. There's to eliminate these items. And I think what you said about, like, it's interesting that he is a seeker by training, in terms of sports, but he actively chooses not to seek the Horcruxes, or not, sorry, the Horcruxes, the Hallows. Like he's given the chance to choose that, and he chooses not to, for whatever reason, whatever in him guided him in that direction. I don't know that it's clear, but there's something that seems significant. I don't know. Maybe it has to do with his ties to other people. That Dumbledore, as a young person, sort of eschewed, right? He had his follower friend, and he had a brother that he looked down on, and then he had a sister that it was his job to take care of. Maybe he pitied, but he didn't really have a team. People with whom he was genuinely like in communion with, or in community with. At least he's not presented as having that.
Yeah, it's sad a bit about Dumbledore's story, and maybe more of this will come out as J.K. Rowling continues to tell backstory. But he passes over, well, of course, the voice that he is in Harry's mind passes over things about him in his battle with Grindelwald, and kind of how it was that he was able to defeat this other really powerful wizard who had the most powerful wand, right? That remains kind of a mystery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That I suspect has to do with Dumbledore's great, answer of love, right? And there's definitely like hints. Maybe this is another rabbit hole, but hints that there's a love relationship between Grindelwald, which I love pronouncing it that way, and Dumbledore. That is kind of interesting, right? This power of love has many different manifestations in the story. One really important one that you brought up was with Snape loving the part of Harry's mother that is still in him, which is represented by his eyes, right? As Snape is expiring, he wants to look in Harry's eyes one more time, the black and the green, right? It's just very, very well done. Like, as much as I've criticized this book out of all the others in the series, those are some of the most emotionally packed kind of reveals that we get at the end, with Snape's whole story of puppy love for Lily Potter, or the Evans, right, who would become Lily Potter. There's just a lot of really excellent kind of denouement that happens here, and some happens off stage, right? The destruction of some of these Horcruxes is just like a blink of an eye. We've been building up to it over this long, long book, but it's still excellent. The kiss between Hermione and Ron, when Ron suggests they have to save the house elves in the Hogwarts kitchens, right? There's a lot of beautiful kind of moments here. But again, yeah, I think that love theme is the kind of other side of that separation theme, maybe, that so the way that evil undoes itself and causes separation, love sort of knits things back together. And that's the last image in the story proper, is Harry uses the Elder Wand for one thing only, is to fix his old wand. And it it's kind of that great knitting together, stitching together the last scene with one of the first, where he gets the wand in the first place.
Yeah, no, I mean, very much profound. I'm just thinking about that, and to what extent what Harry is doing in that moment is accepting limitation, is accepting, one of the images of love, besides the sort of pagan image of cupiditas and Cupid sort of seizing you in the language of Francesca from the Inferno, but that more the Christian idea, which is chosen bondage to something. There's a bond that is accepted. And so what Harry seems to be accepting here is limitation on his power so that he can remain human, because there's no greater state than that. That insofar as somebody seeks to be something more than human, they will necessarily be less than human, like Voldemort, or like Dumbledore and his withered hand in the last year. Just two things I wanted to comment about that are that I found the way that Snape's memories were revealed satisfying, and I did not consider that trite nor an unnecessary break in the action. Nor was I bothered by the fact that the pensieve was still there, even though Albus Dumbledore had not been there, and the room had been occupied by a different headmaster. But I think that headmaster must have been Snape, so it makes sense. And I also was not bothered by Dumbledore being presented as somewhat cold. I thought that was actually a real strength of this book, whereas he had appeared to be getting more and more sort of emotional, and to the extent of sort of losing the integrity of his character. I thought he's also shown as still being very much in control of his intellect and having a plan, and having an incredible plan that ultimately works. And still being very much insightful too. When he's talking to Snape, he just dismissively says he's not arrogant like James. He's very much more like his mother. And it's just that sort of deep level insight that he can just throw at Snape, who is himself a genius, as we know. But the depths of Dumbledore's mind do go deeper even than Snape's. The things he can consider, like sacrificing Harry, but himself also, because he knows Harry, knows that Harry will accept the conditions of the sacrifice, because he knows his character in a way that Snape does not. And so I just wanted to mention that I was happy to see Dumbledore again across media, seemingly, not only in Harry's mind, but also in the pensieve. And I was happy to see that he, even if he did come off as cold, came off very much as himself, as the character Dumbledore.
Yeah, I love the various media. There's the pensieve. We get the resurrection stone ghosts, which are sort of ghosts, but sort of just in Harry's mind or projections. They're kind of like those disembodied forms that came out of the priori incantatum moment, right, in the sort of the heart of the whole series, the middle point. Then also the ghost of Ravenclaw, right? The ghost that, like the fiend fire, that's just kind of thrown in there. There's this other ghost in the castle that we've never met, but of course there has to be one for Ravenclaw, and so she kind of reveals another moment that was planted in the very beginning of the series. What's going on in Albania, such that Voldemort goes there when he's disembodied. Well, it's because he's finding that hat that the Ravenclaw family has imbued with power that he wants. So yeah, there's just a lot of kind of bravura pieces of showmanship here, of bringing in magic and ghosts and forms and all these different ways, to such an extent apparently that certain authorities consider this book very dangerous and not to be read by impressionable young people. But yeah, maybe there's something to that. Maybe it is a very powerful thing that has to be treated with great care and exorcism if necessary.
Well, insofar as exorcism is allegorically understood as sort of censorship, what I think it really is at this point, getting rid of the bad thoughts that come from the literature that causes the bad thoughts, I think might be the idea underlying it. But I think that idea might be, if that idea is an idea that exists in order to maintain the health of the child, I think that is an ill-founded idea, because the idea in confronting something like Harry Potter, and then something much more, much deeper and more powerful than Harry Potter later on, like Nietzsche or the Bible, or the Iliad, is that you are exposing a student, a young person, to a boggart, essentially, that will take a certain form, and they will have to do combat with it, with their young discerning mind. And a young adult literature fantasy novel like this is sort of put at the cognitive level that like a video game that a young person can deal with, the level of complexity that they can see evil at and resonate with and start to form their character against. Though I also understand the evangelical case against this, in that it is a literal case that there is magic happening and that is therefore evil. I don't understand. I suppose I would not understand a case being made against this book suggesting that its underlying morals or the underlying symbols are contrary to what you would find taught in a Catholic Christian environment, or just a general Christian environment. Just to address that thing that's happening in Tennessee right now, from my perspective.
I think it's terribly ironic that we found out about that. I mean, it's probably a small story, maybe being blown out of proportion. I don't know. My guess is it won't last, given that it's become national news. But
for sure,
at least in some circles. But it's just ironic to me that this passage is the most Christian section that we've read the entire series, I would argue. And I find that just it's laugh out loud. The way I wept out loud when Fred died and when Snape died. I am of the belief that Snape is maybe a different kind of hero to the story than Harry. I think maybe a hero that, at least in a Christian lens, Snape is more like us than Harry. He's much more broken and majority flawed in his being, and he wrestles with stuff a lot more than I think Harry does. But that's just I think that's just That's just me, but it's just the height of irony to me that like the son offers his life willingly for the sake of the many, like fully reconciled with the fact that he's about to die, and in doing so, that's what saves him. And he comes back and he defeats the evil spirit, and it's just so religious. Not like to the point of Chronicles of Narnia, this is also obvious kind of religious, but like, I don't know.
No, I agree. There's just the sort of underlying landscape of symbols and I would say ethics as well are sort of similar. It's not done in a superficial or conscious way, I would say, which would make it feel maybe tackier or more like art in the service of another idea rather than art for art's sake. So I'm not making the claim also when I mention similarities in symbols that this is a consciously Christian work that should be on the Christian part of a bookshelf at a bookstore, but just that many of the symbols mean the same thing. And so just because we're getting close to sort of the arbitrary limit that we set for this particular conversation, I just wanted to address one of 2 points before we ended. Either the death of Fred, which I know was a gut-wrenching one, or Voldemort's name, but I think I just want to mention the death of Fred very quickly. So something I've had a problem with since before we reread this was the fact that Fred dies rather than Ron. And it was pretty popular in the literature that at the time, J.K. Rowling was receiving endless letters from young fans saying, please don't kill Ron. And so I think that she consciously chose not to kill Ron against her better authorial judgment and pandered slightly to the fans. And my argument for that is that it is a common trope that the best friend must die for the great hero to live up to his destiny, and that allegorically that's sort of like the death of the lesser path so that the greater path can be taken by means of choice for someone. So Achilles and Patroclus are an old theme here. Even older than that are Enkidu and Gilgamesh. Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh becomes great. Patroclus dies, Achilles lives up to his destiny. I could probably name even more than that, but just it is a major theme in any case. And if I have to list more, I will. But I think that Ron should have died, and that would have really heightened the emotional impact of the Battle of Hogwarts. I think it would have been the perfect emotional pitch. I think it would have been gut-wrenching, truly gut-wrenching. Like, I think people would avoid reading this story because it would hurt so bad to see that. And I don't think that it would just be pain in the service of pain, because I think that would be Harry having to overcome the hate that he would feel for Voldemort in order to make this a story about love and not make him a third Achilles, a second Aeneas, a yet another protagonist who's overcome by hate because of something just unendurable at the end. I think it would have made this, a masterpiece.
I can see that. I didn't know that part about the kid writing letters to her begging to keep Ron alive, but I get this sort of the sense of that, right? That she can imagine the effect that her book is going to have on the people reading it. She wants to spare them that blow. The way I think about it is that would have made Ron in some way too important, possibly, like as a sacrificial figure, when the sacrifice that we're concerned with here is both Harry's and to an extent Snape's as well, right? There's already an awful lot of sacrifice going on. So having another death would be, dare I say, overkill of a major character. But the character who dies, right, Fred, is maybe elevated to a status that he otherwise wouldn't have had by his death there. It's passed over pretty quickly. You know, it's given a certain amount of pathos, but it isn't like dwelt on to a great extent. Even as much as like Dobby's death earlier in the book was, you know, it's treated in passing, and because of the impulse of the action, you know, Tonks dies, and so does Lupin, you know, and so there's a lot of death going on. I don't feel as strongly that it was a mistake or an error on her part to leave Ron alive. I'm just glad that Neville made it out.
Yeah, long live Neville, right? I am sort of more with you, Wes. I don't find like it to be a glaring error. And the reason for that is a couple things. I think in the two examples that you gave, Alex, of the lesser version of the man dying, right? The lesser path, so that the hero might be inspired to take their place, right? I mean, I think you could see like versions of that in like the Star Wars trilogy, right? Like the loss of Obi-Wan, or even for Rey, like the death of the father figure in Han Solo being like this precipitating moment. Sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the more recent Star Wars.
Oh, no.
Sorry. But yeah, I think like a close death being the reason why you go onto the battlefield, or you know, the thing that makes you accept your mission and your identity. See, the thing for Harry is I think he is presented as far more sensitive already to his ties to people. Like, he doesn't have just one best friend, right? He is very sensitive to the fact that, you know, the hopes of the wizarding community are riding on him. He's got Hermione. He has the entire Weasley family that's basically his surrogate family. And I think he almost doesn't need the death of his best friend to like jostle him into action the same way as maybe other more lone figures might. But I also think like his greatness is not in the same kind of battle. It's not in like he was already willing to make that sacrifice without Ron dying, I think. And the other thing too, I think, is that like that would really complicate the storyline with Hermione if Ron died, right? I think that would be. I think that might be just as good a reason to keep him alive, even though Hermione can do better. But she loves him, and Harry loves her. And I think I read somewhere that like there were people who thought that eventually Hermione and Harry should be together, and they should kind of fulfill that fear that Ron always had. But you know, I love that it's a platonic friendship between a boy and a girl, and like that is a hallmark of the modern world, I think. And I think to take Ron's life would have really damaged this character that, quite frankly, did more for the mission in the 7th book than a lot of other people.
Dumbledore was even counting on it, right?
Saved them so many times. Sorry?
Dumbledore was even counting on it. He thought that Harry would figure things out sooner because of the help of Hermione. And
right, which Harry was refusing at multiple turns, right? Like, yeah, I thought, exactly. Yeah, I think that's sort of, to me, another, I mean, it may not be a narratively honest reason to kill Fred instead of Ron, but it fits with me. I'm comfortable with it.
Well, I just thought, and so a couple more examples just from epic literature at first, and then a funny one is that, in the Aeneid, Aeneas loses his, I guess, new best friend, Pallas, who he promised to keep alive.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Divine Comedy, it is the case in Dante's life that he has exiled his best friend, Guido Cavalcante, who then died of malaria later that same year. And so might have felt partially responsible even for that death in a very Achilles Patroclus sort of way. And, even in the Mortal Kombat movie, Liu Kang doesn't step up to his destiny without that younger brother. But I do agree with you. I think I see it differently. I think that archetype is real without it necessarily being operant in this case. Because I do agree that his motivations are already sound. He might not need that extra pain. And maybe that kindness to a character is also part of authorial intent, or the author's relationship with the characters and the community of people that house the characters in their hearts and minds. But one thing, though, that's tragic, though, is George, One thing that's said after the books is that he can never cast a Patronus again. And that it's just those twins without each other. I mean, I guess it's the moment of ultimate self-growth for old Georgie, but geez, that seems rather cruel, because they're really like an echo chamber, or just, they were like one being. And so I don't know exactly what to do with that, though I do agree with both your reasoning, and I am seeing this situation differently now, so I'm glad I brought it up.
I am too, because it's something that I know is a huge, epic topos or something, right? And I like the point about, Fred and George being this kind of unit that's now severed there at the end. Their spirit is such a big part of what makes the books really come alive. And so, to lose that, in a way, drives you maybe to want to reread the books, to go back to recover that kind of thing when everyone's still together and still alive. Those first 3 books don't have moments like that so much. But then you get Cedric, and you get what's his name, Sirius, and so on.
What's his name?
Yeah, and then Dumbledore, and then lots of people, and
I think so what did these 2 boys, I mean, 2 as basically one, I mean, that was like the running joke, is that they were constantly being mistaken for one another, even by their own mother. What they seem to represent to me is like a kind of levity, a childishness, and not in a bad way, but like they're jokesters, they're practical pranksters, they are entrepreneurial, they're imaginative and creative, and they, to me, are really all of the good and all of the bad of adolescence, right? They're fiercely loyal to their friends. They rag on people they hate. They're the worst students in the class, and yet they're the smartest kids, potentially in their entire family, given what they then create. They go through so many ordinary experiences of the adolescent, and then I don't know, maybe what happens to Fred and George at the end. George has previously lost his ear, and he still makes a joke about it, right? Obviously, realistically, it probably is a terrible burden for him to learn to live with. But even when we hear them on the radio, they are still making moments of levity, and in fact, it's in like those really dark moments where Harry and Ron and Hermione need this humor. But it makes me wonder, like, where is the role of comedy in a world like that's at peace, right? Because I think comedy often presents the world like in our world, comedy often like raises the mirror and pokes fun at the things that are true and ugly, and does so, and like you laugh about it, but it's also kind of like yucky, right? But maybe there's something about the era that they're entering into where that kind of humor, I don't know, maybe it doesn't have a place. I don't know. That's the only way that I can sort of make sense of it. I'm not sure that I buy that. But I don't know. Is there something that's like distinctly childlike about them?
Yeah, I think what I see, like a light through the prism of your thought there, Sarah, is that what's happening there is they are serving as a metaphor or as a symbol, as an allegory for the death of youth of everybody involved with these books, the characters within as well as us at the end of them, if we've read them at sort of a yearly interval, which many of us did growing up, that as perfect as those characters were, they both died in that moment because George became an adult, forever different, forever severed from that childlike sort of perfection or Pan nature, that Peter Pan everything nature. If this were in the His Dark Materials world, everybody's diamond would have been set right about that moment. And so I agree that they can't move on because after this Battle of Hogwarts, when people's characters are set, when they're adults, they just can't act in that way anymore. They can't be so jubilant. They can't be so naive, as they can't be so free-spirited even as Fred and George, who were already becoming, rather capitalists in their lives anyway. But I think you're right that it shows a character progression from childhood into adulthood, that even they could only be that way at that age, but even they would have to be adults. And so in one way, it's easier for Fred because he never has to not be that. But George also gets to experience, a fuller life, though part of the richness and fullness of it is, of course, the horrendous tragedy of losing his best friend and twin.
And it's not fair, right? Like, even when things are restored, I mean, the writ large, right? Even when Voldemort is destroyed and Harry is cleansed and Hogwarts is saved, that doesn't mean everything ends up good for everyone, right? Like, Remus and Tonks are dead. Their son is an orphan. Their son is orphaned, maybe not the way Harry was orphaned, because obviously this young lad is being raised in a very loving household, but like, just because quote unquote the good side triumphs doesn't mean that it's all fair. And I think that it's maybe it's right that it does sit like uncomfortably with people, that like, but I loved them. They were so wonderful. Why don't they get to live a full life? Well, like, that just isn't how, I don't know, that doesn't track with even like grand clashes between good and evil. There's damage. I don't know. But even at the end, in King's Cross, in that chapter with Dumbledore in his mind, the first thing that Dumbledore says to him is, my wonderful boy, my brave, brave man. Like, in one sentence, he goes from boy to man in the voice of his like mentally projected Dumbledore. But that's, given what we've talked about this over the last year about maturation, that seemed important.
Well, let's talk about that next time. Let's lead with the importance of language and, make some connections between boys becoming men or children becoming adults, and the unique place that Hermione has in that conversation, which you brought up, and being the uniquely modern situation. And, we really are very much unique, and that's in that sense that we have her character arc, that we have a new Tupos in development. And so maybe we can hit these bigger themes of language and development, I can mention we can all mention the Aeneid, the Odyssey, maybe even some James Joyce too, Stephen Dedalus, and maybe even our own generation. And then again, talk a little bit about just the place that this book occupies in I suppose our lives, but also in our world at this point and what it's doing. And then talk about what fantasy literature is and what a fantasy world is, or whatever else that we end up talking about, which I'm sure will be enlightening as usual.
Yeah, we've got a lot left to do, but it's been really cool getting to talk about this end of this book. It's great stuff. I'm sorry I forgot Sirius's name for a minute there. I'll be haunted.
I was just joking.
He would joke that he'd probably forget it himself anyway, so I think all forgiven. All right, well, bottoms up, y'all. I would be having some chamomile tea or some mineral water, and I say congratulations to you as well, Wes, bringing more things into life rather than just brilliant thoughts.
Thank you. We'll raise a glass to that one of these days.
Yeah,
cheers to you both. So many new things on your horizon. So cheers to you both.
Yeah, reading all this Harry Potter about family and the power of love. Got to get on it. Got to live it. All right.
Well, talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Cheers.